In December 1963, in a village called Suzdal, 300 kilometers east of Moscow, a 6-year-old boy named Misha was dying. He had been sick for 4 days. His fever had reached 41 degrees Celsius, 106 degrees Fahrenheit. The local hospital had no antibiotics in stock. The roads were closed by snow. The village doctor had visited that morning, examined Misha, told the family there was nothing he could do, and left. The boy might not survive the night. The boy's grandmother walked into the courtyard, killed a chicken, and began to make broth. She did not feed Misha pieces of the chicken. She did not give him bouillon from a packet. She did not call the hospital again. She did what Russian peasant women had done for at least 300 years when a child was dying in winter. She put the bones, the feet, the neck, the wings, and a quartered onion into a clay pot of water on the wood stove and let it simmer for 12 hours. Every hour she fed the boy a spoonful. By the time morning came, his fever had broken. This is not a story about miracle cures. The boy might have recovered anyway. The point is what the grandmother knew, what she did, and why she did it, and why almost every Russian peasant household for the last 200 years has had a pot of bones simmering on the stove through every winter. If you are new here, this channel preserves the survival knowledge the modern world erased. Subscribe so YouTube actually shows you the rest. Russian peasant households did not throw away bones. They did not throw away marrow. They did not throw away feet. They did not throw away the gristle, the connective tissue, the cartilage, or the skin. Bones were not food, and they were not garbage. They were the foundation of everything else. The Russian word for broth, bouillon, was applied to a category of liquids so broad that it included clear consommes, dense gelatinous aspics, fish stocks, vegetable bases, and the medicinal infusions made for sick children. The principle behind all of them was the same: slow heat, long time, nothing wasted. To understand why this mattered so much, you have to understand the economy of meat in Russian peasant life. Meat was skor. A village family kept perhaps 1 pig and a few chickens. The pig was slaughtered in late autumn after the first frost, when the cold preserved the meat through winter. What came off that pig was rationed across the year. The valuable cuts, pork shoulder, belly, and leg, were salt-cured, smoked or fried, and preserved in lard for the winter months. But the bones were boiled the day of the slaughter. The skin became cracklings. The blood became blood sausage. The intestines became casings. The head was made into kolodets, an aspic so dense it could be sliced like cheese. The trotters were boiled separately for their gelatin. The marrow was scooped out and spread on dark bread. The brain, the liver, the kidneys were all eaten within a week. The pig fed the family for months, but the bones fed the family for the entire year, because the bones became broth, and broth became soup, and soup became almost every meal in a Russian household. The science behind this is not folklore. When bone is simmered for 8 to 24 hours, collagen breaks down into gelatin. The minerals locked in the bone matrix, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and potassium, leach into the water. The amino acids glycine, proline, and glutamine become bioavailable. Stephen Renard, a pulmonary medicine specialist at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, published a study in the journal Chest in October 2000 demonstrating that traditional chicken soup made with bones and connective tissue simmered for hours inhibited neutrophil migration in vitro, suggesting actual anti-inflammatory activity. Renard's recipe was, by his own admission, his Lithuanian Jewish grandmother's recipe, which is to say structurally identical to what Russian peasant women had been making since at least the early 1700s. Modern bone broth research, much of it documented in Sally Fallon and Kayla Daniels' 2014 book Nourishing Broth, has confirmed what the babushkas always claimed. Long-simmered broth made from animal bones contains more bioavailable minerals than the same animal's meat. It contains gelatin that aids digestion. It contains amino acids the body uses to repair connective tissue. None of this was known to the grandmothers. They simply knew that it worked. Here is how they made it. The first broth, called prvichnyi bouillon, was a clear stock simmered 8 to 12 hours. Bones from beef, pork, chicken, or fish were placed in cold water over low heat. The slow heat extraction is critical. Boiling produces a cloudy broth, while slow simmer produces a clear one. As scum rose to the surface, the babushka skimmed it off with a wooden spoon and a small saucer. After 2 hours, vegetables were added: a whole carrot, a whole onion with its papery skin still on for color, a parsley root, a stalk of dill, a few black peppercorns, and a bay leaf. The pot continued simmering until the bones gave up their flavor, and the kitchen smelled, in the Russian phrase, as if the soul of the house had filled the air. Drop the word broth in the comments if you are still with us. That first broth became the base of every soup in the Russian repertoire. Shchi, the cabbage soup that defines Russian peasant cuisine, was simmered cabbage, onion, carrot, and a few potatoes in beef bone broth, finished with a spoon of sour cream at the table. Borscht used the same base with the addition of beets, tomato paste, and either pork or beef. Rasolnik, the pickle soup, used kidneys and broth and pearl barley and chopped salted cucumbers. Solyanka, the sour and salty soup, used 3 different cured meats and the same bone broth. Uka, the fish soup, used the bones and heads of pike or perch instead of land animal bones, and was traditionally cooked over an open fire rather than on the stove because peasants believed the smoke flavor was essential to the dish. The Ukha tradition is worth pausing on. There are recognized regional varieties: Volga Uka, Don Uka, Lake Ladoga Uka, Astrakhan Uka, and each has its own technique. The Don variant adds tomatoes. The Volga variant uses sterlet, a small sturgeon. The Russian North variant layers 3 different fish into the same broth in succession, beginning with the smallest and ending with the largest, and was traditionally finished with a thimble of vodka poured into the pot just before serving. The smoke from a wood fire is considered so important to a proper ukha that some Russian families, still in 2026, refuse to make it on a kitchen stove and will only prepare it outdoors over birchwood. Whether the smoke contributes chemically to the flavor or whether the smoke is simply part of the ritual is a question Russians do not consider worth asking. The smoke is part of the soup. But the most distinctive Russian use of bones was not soup at all. It was kolodets, also called student in some regions, the cold meat aspic that is to Russian winter what jellied salad is to American Christmas, except that no American Christmas dish has ever achieved what kolodets achieves. Kolodets is made by boiling pig's feet, beef shank bones, and gristle for 8 hours, then letting the resulting broth cool overnight in a shallow dish. The collagen that has leached out of the bones sets the entire dish into a savory, sliceable, mineral-dense gel studded with shreds of cooked meat and flecks of garlic. It is served cold with horseradish or mustard. Russian peasants ate it through the winter. Russian families still eat it every New Year. There are babushkas in 2026 who can still tell you which butcher in their town sells the right pig's feet for proper kolodets, and which butcher should be avoided because his feet do not gel. The regional variations of kolodets reveal how deeply embedded the dish is in Russian life. The Belarusian variant uses primarily pork and a generous hand with the garlic. The Tatar variant, called tutirma, uses beef and lamb together. The Ukrainian variant adds chopped boiled egg into the cooling layer. The Siberian variant adds the head meat of a pig and is considered the most pungent. Every region disputes which version is the correct one, which is exactly what regional Russian cuisine is supposed to do. After the first broth was used, the bones were not thrown away. They were cracked open with a small hammer or a stone, exposing the marrow. The marrow was scraped out and either eaten directly on dark bread sprinkled with salt, a peasant breakfast through the winter, or stirred into the broth itself for richness. Then the cracked bones went back into the pot with fresh water and a tablespoon of vinegar. This is the second extraction, called vtoryczny bouillon. The vinegar dissolves additional calcium and minerals from the bone matrix that pure water cannot reach. The food science behind this is well established and documented across nutritional literature for the past century. This second broth was weaker, but it was used for cooking grains. Russian kasha, meaning buckwheat, millet, barley, and oats, was almost never cooked in plain water in peasant households. It was cooked in second extraction bone broth. Modern American hot cereal cooked in water is one nutritional category. Russian kasha cooked in twice extracted bone broth is another category entirely. After the second extraction, the bones still were not thrown away. They were given to the dog or buried at the base of the dacha garden's tomato plants, where their slow decomposition added calcium to the soil. By the time the Russian babushka was done with the chicken had no further use for itself. Drop a like if you are learning something. YouTube pays attention to that. The traditional uses of bone broth in Russian peasant practice were specific and consistent. After childbirth, women were fed strong chicken bone broth for 9 days. The folk belief was that it restored the bones and the strength of the mother. The actual science suggests the gelatin aids tissue repair and the minerals replace what was depleted in delivery. Old people with aching joints were given daily cups of beef bone broth through the winter. The folk belief was that it cured the aches. The actual science suggests the glycine and proline support cartilage. Children with colds were given chicken broth with garlic, dill, and a spoon of vodka rubbed on the chest. The broth was taken internally and the vodka applied externally only. The folk belief was that the broth healed the child. Modern research suggests the broth provides hydration, electrolytes, and bioactive compounds with mild anti-inflammatory activity. None of this would have surprised the babushkas. They were not surprised when the children got better. They had expected it. The broth had always worked. In the Soviet shortage years between 1985 and 1991, when actual meat became almost impossible to find in state food stores, the bone broth tradition became even more essential. A single beef bone obtained through Blat, the informal Soviet exchange network of favors and connections, could provide a household with 12 meals worth of broth. Bones themselves became a kind of unofficial currency in late Soviet kitchens. A woman who worked at a meat processing plant and could bring home a bag of soup bones on a Friday afternoon was a woman with influence on her apartment block. The bones were divided, traded, given as favors. A particularly good marrow bone was considered worth a jar of homemade preserves or a half-liter of vegetable oil in the informal exchanges that kept Soviet households fed. The Soviet state recognized this implicitly. Soviet hospitals served patients clear chicken broth as part of the standard post-operative recovery diet. The Soviet cookbook, The Book of Tasty and Healthy Food, in its 1952 edition, devoted an entire chapter to broths and described in detail the proper extraction technique, including the second extraction vinegar method that came directly from peasant practice. The Soviet Union understood, even when it would not admit it openly, that the food knowledge of the peasant grandmother was more reliable than the food production of the planned economy. Modern American kitchens have a special slot for bones. It is called the trash can. The cost of throwing them away is not just nutritional. The cost is generational. The American household that buys boneless, skinless chicken breasts and discards the bones it never sees is also a household where the connection to the slow, deliberate, deeply nourishing cooking tradition has been quietly severed. The hour-long shortcut that supermarket meat provides was bought at the price of the 8-hour broth that fed Russian peasant families through 200 years of winters, wars, famines, and the collapse of empires. The babushkas of Suzdal, Voronezh, Kostroma, and 10,000 other Russian villages did not throw away bones for the same reason they did not throw away peels, did not throw away starch water, did not throw away anything edible, because they understood that the value of a piece of food was not visible in its surface, but in the slow work of extracting what was actually inside it. The chicken was not the chicken. The chicken was 3 meals, plus broth, plus gelatin, plus marrow, plus minerals, plus calcium for the tomato plants. The American supermarket sells you the chicken and then sells you a separate calcium supplement, a separate gelatin supplement, a separate mineral water, a separate collagen powder. The Russian babushka would have looked at this and asked, with the bluntness only an old peasant woman can carry, why the Americans are paying 3 times for what they have already paid for once. This channel exists to record those methods before the last babushka who remembers them is gone. In the next video, we are going to look at the tooth cleaning system Russian peasants used for 300 years, a powder made from clay, salt, and dried herbs that cost almost nothing, clean teeth more effectively than the industrial alternatives of the early 20th century, and quietly disappeared from Russian households when state pharmacies started stocking standardized toothpaste in the 1960s. Subscribe and turn on the bell so YouTube actually tells you when it goes live. Thank you for watching. If this taught you something you did not know, leave a like. It is the single biggest signal that tells YouTube to push this video to other people who still care about real knowledge. Drop a comment telling us whether your own grandmother made bone broth, what she put in it, and what region of the world she learned it from. We read every comment. Subscribe, like, comment. We will see you in the next one.